Hello everyone, my name is Spencer Boondock, and today I will be talking about Wang Da-Hong. Let's just get right into it. Wang Da-Hong was born in 1917 and recently passed away in 2018. He was a Chinese-born Taiwanese architect. Um, Many believed him to be a pioneer for modernist architecture in Taiwan, while still integrating many aspects of traditional Chinese architecture into his designs. His designs were often informed by the traditional Chinese gardens and the Chinese courtyard house, which would be called excuse my pronunciation, the Si Hai Yuan. Wow, I butchered it, I know it. Anyways, Wang was the son of a Chinese politician, jurist, and diplomat. Um, he had actually written two fictional books, and he had won in 2014 Taiwan's National Cultural Award. Moving on to Wang Da-Hong's education, in the early 1930s, he was enrolled in school in Switzerland. Um, Later in 1936, he started studying engineering at Cambridge University and switched to architecture sometime in between 1936 and 1940. By 1940, he had enrolled at Harvard University, where he was taught by the Walter Gropius. Some of his classmates included I.M. Pei and Philip Johnson, who we've heard about. I.M. Pei was the designer of the Louvre's pyramid, as well as Huang Zhaoshen, who he later became colleagues with in 1947. And we're just going to hop right into the case studies, starting with the first building, which was the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Taiwan. Just immediately looking at the building, we see a organization of the facade that is very relevant to modernist architecture, very controlled, and the sort of processional feel of the garden to the interior space, which is looking like the bottom right photo, into the top right photo. He does make a lot of modernist moves in symmetry and the sort of grid system that we can see in the overhang and the pilotes that fall beneath it. But we also see a lot of subtle and abstracted Chinese traditional design techniques and building techniques. For instance, if you look at the overhang and the top floor of the building, we see a sort of abstracted bracket structure that we had seen in the Ming and Qing dynasty lectures in the very beginning of the semester. As well as looking at the interior, we see screens that may not be exact replicants of the screens from Chinese scholar gardens, like the dividers in between the building or in the buildings of the Chinese scholar gardens. Moving on, his unbuilt design of the National Palace Museum in a competition that took place in 1960 to 1961. This was his design for the National Palace Museum. We see here a grid system, both in vertical section and in plan, with the pilotes being spaced out equally. And the bottom floor was transparent glass, which was covered by screens similar to the last building and reminiscent of Chinese dividers, traditional Chinese dividers. And then the top floor was actually opaque concrete panels, and the roof was reinforced concrete. We see here a tripartite division of the building, which was definitely reminiscent of neoclassical architecture, but took place still again in the modernist era. And we also see a sort of processionality of the entering of the building in the front little square pond here, and the bridges that cross over it. his design never did win that design competition. Oh, it did win, excuse me. He did win that design competition, but the design ended up being rejected in favor of a more traditional approach. Here is another view of his model, which looks crazy. You can take a closer look at the columns evenly spaced and the screens that would be overlaid on top of the transparent facade on the bottom floor. And then lastly, Dr. Sun Yat-sen Memorial Hall, which was constructed from 1929 to 1931. We see here a building very reminiscent of traditional Chinese architecture, but done with very modernist techniques, I guess. We see the large curved eaves as in much of traditional Chinese architecture, but we see it used in a different way. There is a bit of like messing with the facade here. Typically in traditional Chinese architecture, you might see terracotta tiling on top of the roof, but instead here they've decided to create a flat facade, as in much of, say, Le Corbusier's architecture. The colors are also very relevant to the culture. I don't know if you guys remember this, but in the Ming and Qing dynasty lecture, Professor Crawford talked about how yellow glazing of the roof was indicative of a building that would be occupied by the emperor. In this case, Dr. Sun Yat-sen was a statesman and a core physician for Taiwan at the time. And the layout before the building is somewhat processional, as you might see in, say, the Forbidden City, which I will show you in the next slide. Here you see the building, and then in front of it is a large courtyard that has a center pool here and lots of beautifully designed gardens. You can take a better look at the roof. Like I said, it's a flat facade tiling. What makes this maybe more modernist is the pilotes that outline the actual core of the building and the high-rise windows in the front. And yeah, to quickly conclude about Wang Da-Hong's architecture in relation to the canon of architectural modernism, I feel that it was refreshing and interesting to research Wang Da-Hong's architecture, because in my brain I typically associated modernism with being like largely responsible for the cultural erasure in architecture post like colonialism, and it was nice to know that modernism wasn't completely erasing like regional culture, and that someone like Wang Da-Hong can take the style of modernism and blend it with traditional cultural aspects. So yeah, thank you guys. Bye.